Oh, typical. And it is hot. What is up, guys? I am Howie, and this is the Go Ride channel, coming at you with Motovlog Volume 3. Today, we're going to be talking about four specific pointers as how to buy the best used 749 or 999 that you can. And the first three of these things are going to be fairly general, and we're going to just basically start with stuff that's going to help you on any vehicle, and then we'll get a little more model specific at the end. So those of you that are maybe looking for, say, like a 1098, you know, you can tune it out or whatever. So the first thing that you should do, this goes for buying any used vehicle, is to buy the newest, lowest mileage version of whatever it is that you want, that you can possibly afford. The newest, lowest mileage one is going to be the least worn out, and as a general rule, you're going to have fewer failures. So that's probably number one. Number two, and I struggled to find a diplomatic way to say this, and so I'm going to borrow from Jalopnik on a blog post that they did about buying a used car. They said, in addition to inspecting the vehicle, one should also inspect the seller. And what do I mean by that? You should take a look, starting with the ad, at who it is you're buying this vehicle from, and see if they seem like, you know, they're a good, honest person. Are they being completely forthright with things like maintenance, maybe accident history, you know, stuff to that effect. It starts, like I said, when reading the ad, right? You're going to want to buy a bike that runs well, and maybe not a bike that runs good. You know, that's kind of one of the things to be mindful of. And then it continues on the phone. You want to avoid bikes that have stories, right? You don't want to buy a story, you want to buy a motorcycle. I'm going to apologize for the audio here. I'm lifting the visor because it's hot. You want to avoid bikes with stories. You don't want to buy a story, you want to buy a motorbike. So inspect the seller, right? And this also goes too, especially if they tell you that they've done their own maintenance on the bike. Figure out if they're somebody that should even own tools, let alone be touching a Ducati or whatever it is that you're looking at. Which brings me to my third point for Ducati specifically, maintenance history. You want to make sure that you are buying a bike with a good maintenance history. And what does that mean? That means, to me, receipts, right? You know, if the guy tells you that they've done their own maintenance, like I said, use your better judgment. If they have 4 749 track bikes, you know, and an exhaust gas analyzer and a dynamometer in their garage, you know, and a bunch of Ducati specific tooling and all this stuff, you might be okay, you know. But if you're buying it from a guy who has like 7 El Caminos that are in various states of disassembly and all the shutters are falling off their house, then, you know, maybe you might want to think twice about that guy. So that'd be good to know. You know, kind of who you're dealing with and whether or not that's important. Ducatis and Italian vehicles, as a typical rule, are more susceptible to failure as a result of untimely or lack of maintenance than I think your average bike is, or a vehicle. They just the way in which they're designed, you know, the size of the oil passages, etc., you know, makes them more susceptible to failure. And maintenance is expensive, right? So that should be valued, factored into when you're looking at the purchase price of the bike. To do a full valve job with a belt, fluid changes and stuff on a Ducati, you're looking at basically no less than $1,200 at a dealer on like the super bikes like this iteration. I had them address an oil leak and some other things, and I spent over $1,600 last year just getting the maintenance caught up on this thing. So this is definitely a case of do as I say and not as I do. So if I had a choice, I could do it over again between a bike with receipts and a full maintenance history for, say, $500, $600, $700, $800 more than this bike, I would go with the other bike, the bike with the maintenance history. It's definitely worth it. It's just going to allow the bike to last a lot longer. You're going to have less headaches. Go for that. So my fourth point is going to be to know model-specific problems. Understand what the failure modes are for whatever bike you're looking at. And this can be established by looking at forums, especially looking at the stickies on the forums, right? What are people having problems with so frequently that, that a forum moderator is going to think it's important to just leave it up all the time at the top of the forum. So that's, because not everybody on those forums, necessarily every problem that you see is a common problem, and that's something that's very important to note. So what is that on the 749 999? Probably the most common failure is going to be your side stand bracket. The same issues that I had. Over time, the bike has, a really steep lean angle. The bolts loosen up. People don't tighten them, don't take care of them. They do things with the side stands like spin the bike that they shouldn't. And then the bracket bends, it puts additional pressure on the side stand, and then it breaks. So definitely take a look at that. Make sure there's no helicoils in there, or if there are helicoils, that they've been done correctly. Make sure that the bracket itself is not bent or cracked. Make sure that the side stand, if you have stock fairings on the bike, make sure this side stand is sitting on the pocket correctly, because that could be indicative of something being bent. So that's probably your number one failure mode. Number two failure mode on these bikes is the fuel systems, and just about every part of them, there's some kind of problem. There is an aluminum bulkhead where the wires, the fuel pump power wires, pass through into the fuel pump flange. It's sealed by an O-ring and has a little snap ring that holds it. The wires are in this aluminum bulkhead with epoxy, and over time, especially in California with 10+% ethanol in our gasoline, that epoxy breaks down and will eventually allow those wires to move around a little bit, and they will eventually short out, causing what appears to be a fuel pump failure. If you wiggle them, sometimes it'll come back, and then it'll be really frustrating. It's tough to troubleshoot because it's very difficult to pin them down in a position, where sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. So that's one problem. And the other problems are with the fuel pump relays. Those things are susceptible to getting wet, and when they get wet, they can fail. So that'll cause problems. And then I've also actually heard of debris coming from the factory in the 999 tanks. Not something I've seen personally, but I've heard of a couple of different instances of it. And when you go to hammer down, all that stuff shifts backwards. It covers the pickup screen on the pump and will cause the engine to starve for fuel. Which I've heard of that happening. And then the other thing to watch out for is ECU failures, but there's not a whole lot you can do about that. They also tend to have a hot stall issue, which has to do with cam timing. You can kind of mask it or mitigate it using fuel trims, but as a general rule, that's kind of normal. So if the bike has a hot stall, it's not necessarily indicative of anything being wrong with the bike. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. So with that, you are armed with all the institutional knowledge that I have developed over the last 2 years of owning this monster. And hopefully you can go out and pick yourself a good one. Get out there and go ride it. Go ride. And if I see you out there, I will wave.